Well, first of all, Governor Snyder, thank you so much for taking some of your time out today. I know you've been pretty busy lately.
Yeah, happy to be with you.
Well, good. I want to start out with something that has recently gone through and you signed into law, the Emergency Financial Manager Bill. And of course, this is emergency financial manager legislation has been in law since the Blanchard administration and was put to use quite significantly by your predecessor. How is this, what you've done and what the legislature's done, different? Because I think a lot of people really don't understand.
Yeah, it's a significant improvement. This legislation has been around for some time, has been used for in many occasions. Well, fairly limited, but enough. What I would describe to you is two major features that we did. A very important thing we did was add an early warning system, because the way the prior legislation was set up is basically a jurisdiction could wait and show up and say, hey, here are the keys, good luck. That this has a whole series of events that are triggering events where they have to notify us that they have issues. It deals with if they defaulted on a payment, didn't make payroll, a lot of things like that you'd expect. So when that happens, there's a whole system of review that takes place of the state working with that jurisdiction and hopefully that jurisdiction coming up with their own plan to keep them out of emergency financial manager status. And that's the goal for all of us.
Right.
It's a failure if you have an EFM. We never want to have that happen. So this early warning system will be a significant improvement. To the degree we have an EFM situation, the old law really had it so that could go on for a long time, and in many cases these have been there for years. This gives the EFM more power to get through that situation faster and better and get that jurisdiction back to the people in the local area. So I think it's a great improvement in both those aspects.
Well, I think what happened with this legislation, though, is that it really came about at almost a perfect storm of national attention. You had the height of the Wisconsin collective bargaining ordeal, and I would argue that this emergency financial manager legislation got caught up in the fervor of the anti-establishment in Wisconsin, and therefore I would also say that the good intentions that you were trying to do with this legislation sort of got hijacked in all of this. I mean, you had came under fire by national commentators like Rachel Maddow, as well as all of the protesters outside the Capitol building. What's your reaction to all of that?
Well, it's good legislation, and it's an exercise in democracy. But in many respects, I think it did get misinterpreted and taken down to just a very, very narrow issue. And as I said before, when I said many, the numbers are very small where we've ever had an emergency financial manager. It's less than 0.5% of all our jurisdictions have ever been there. And so you're talking about a dozen or so, a dozen to a dozen and a half different jurisdictions. And the main issue they had was about collective bargaining, where in fact, if you look to the legislation, through the process, there were several amendments that it is possible to change collective bargaining agreements, but there's a whole litany of waiting periods, of different steps that need to be done through. So it's not just an arbitrary act by an emergency financial manager. There are a number of safeguards there to do it in a very thoughtful fashion, but it is a power that needs to be there to get things done if required.
Well, you mentioned collective bargaining and some of the most vocal protesters to the emergency financial manager legislation, the largest public employee union in the state, the MEA. Now the MEA is talking about things like work stoppages, job actions, which could possibly lead to, I don't want to cast any, predictions on what could happen, but in the end, I mean, we could be talking about illegal strikes. If this happens, do you think that have you taken a look at the penalties that are in place if something like that happens? Do you think that what's in place right now enough?
Well, we'll be prepared to address the situation, and my first premise is I hope none of that does happen, because again, that's a question of MEA leadership bringing up these issues. But I have a lot of confidence in the teachers of our state.
Okay.
The teachers of our state are concerned about our children. And to put our children in a position of being used as a political football is not appropriate. And so I hope the teachers, these good hardworking teachers, are going to stand up and tell the leadership of the MEA that that's not appropriate. that there are better ways to have a discussion.
And to be fair, I have seen a lot of those types of letters to editors, et cetera, by teachers who say, you know what, we're not going to go there if the MEA wants to go there. That being said, though, a lot of people taking a look at what the penalties would be should that happen, because I think a lot of people are doing that right now, are saying that an illegal strike right now, the penalties in place, A, are difficult to enforce, and B, don't have enough teeth. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on that. We will be prepared for various alternatives if they arise. As a practical matter, again, I have confidence in our teachers doing the right thing by our students.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Freedom of Information. Freedom of Information Act request. Of course, that's something that's been in the headlines with us over the past week or so. But I want to talk about it in terms of your administration. Right now, the governor's administration, the legislature, Secretary of State, Attorney General don't have to put all of their information online, salaries, names, et cetera. And they're exempt from FOIA. I know this is something that you discussed during your campaign. You and actually all of your opponents in the primaries, I believe, and your Democratic opponent all said during the campaign that you would lift the FOIA exemptions for the governor. And is this something that you're still poised to do? Is that something you're still calling for?
Well, we disclose compensation. We went out and already did that. In terms of looking at reforms, what I hope to do is get to election reform, government reform, and a whole package. That's a whole nother series, that's another special message. And what I would say to you is, in relative priority, we've had a pretty full plate. For the first 6 months of this year, my goal was first economic development with the state of the state, budget and tax, government reform, for local governments primarily, and then education reform. So we do have a number of special messages for the second half or for early next year that would include things with campaign finance, election reform, dealing with better accountability and transparency.
How about,
but one of the first steps we had, though, was the Citizens Guide to Financial Statements.
Okay.
That I wanted to get that out and done quickly, and we got that out. Actually, it was third parties doing that for us by the end of January.
Let's move on to some tax policy. Film subsidies. Of course, that's been one of the issues that the Mackinac Center is focused on. Continues to be a lot of drama, though. I think that started February 17th when you unveiled your budget and said, let's cap it at 25% and put it in or $25 million rather, and put it in appropriations. You've got a lot of high-profile folks who have very sympathetic and very loud megaphones trying to keep the subsidy program as it is, or incentive program as they are uncapped. Why do you think there is such drama?
Well, as you said, they're from an industry that's good at marketing and publicity, and they do a very good job. And they're sincere. I think they really do care about their issue. It's looking at the big picture and what's best for all of Michigan. And then when you start doing the math and the return on investment to our state, it's a very expensive program. It's getting into picking winners and losers. It's writing people's checks, subsidizing things at a very high cost. It does create some jobs, but if you look at the relative priorities, as I mentioned, we have a $1.5 billion deficit. We couldn't sustain the program that was being done. So I'm doing what I believe is the right thing.
A lot of people right now are, film industry supporters are using the Ernst & Young study, which shows a return on investment of $6 for every $1 spent for the film subsidies. What's your response to that? That seems to be a real popular way to try to defend the program as is.
Well, the E&Y study didn't finish doing all the numbers. If you continue your calculation path, and you do apples to apples. I like to compare it to Pure Michigan. If you do apples to apples with Pure Michigan brings in 2 to 3 tax dollars for every tax dollar we put out. The equivalent in the E&Y study is somewhat less than 30 cents per dollar. So we're actually losing money to the state for doing that program. So the two just shows the light years better magnitude of Pure Michigan in relationship to supporting one of our largest industries for $25 million versus saying people are looking for a $150 million a year subsidy that's actually costing us money in a difficult budget time. It doesn't work.
You know, that was one of the arguments that came up at the last Michigan Film Office Advisory Council meeting, at which your MDC Director Mike Finney went and talked about the program. That was one of the arguments that kept coming up. Well, isn't Governor Snyder picking winners and losers because he's paying for Pure Michigan, but he's not going to pay for film subsidies. I mean, again, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, generally, the government shouldn't be in the role of picking winners and losers. This one, actually, Pure Michigan has a very positive return on investment.
Okay.
It's our second or third largest industry, and you can literally look at the tax dollars coming into the cost of the state. A positive return on investment, good value for money, where it's a negative equation for the film industry. What I also said, though, is if you look at how we're doing things, is going to that winners and losers comment, that's why I want to get rid of tax credits and really push them to the appropriation side of the equation. Because tax credits, in my view, were hidden subsidies that weren't getting the right amount of accountability and transparency, going back to your early topic, that my view is it's democracy. So if somebody's a special interest that says they deserve a special deal, I'm not here to tell them no. My point is, let's not hide it in the tax code. Let's just ask them to go in front of the Appropriations Committee, raise their hand, and say, write me a check.
There you go.
And respect it, and then people can make a decision.
Okay, finally, last question. I want to get this one in because so many people are fired up about the proposal to impose a tax on pensions. A lot of people up in arms about that. Is this something that's just not well understood?
Yeah, a big part of it is a lack of understanding, and we're getting there. As people understand more, I'm getting more and more positive feedback, particularly from seniors, saying they want to pay their fair share. At lower income levels, if the average amount of Social Security, the average property tax credit, a senior couple wouldn't pay anything until they made over $40,000 a year. At higher income levels, we've had a situation where the way the rules work, they didn't pay anything on their pension income, or very little, depending on if it was public or private. If you think about it, we have an aging population. So as more and more people would be excluded from that equation, what happens to our tax system? It pushes that tax burden to our young people. When I was out there campaigning, almost everyone, particularly the seniors, said, we want to keep our kids in the state. The right long-term answer isn't to put more and more tax burden on our young people. It's to ask people to pay their fair share. So all we're simply asking are people at higher income levels to say, shouldn't you pay the same amount of tax that someone has for working, for being in any other position? And think of working seniors. They're paying tax on their income. Isn't it fair to ask someone that just happens to have the benefit of a pension to also contribute?
I think maybe it's a matter of just a mentality that's set in over the years that actually people, seniors have been exempt from this for so long, and then all of a sudden, well, lift the exemption. Well, wait a minute. They maybe not realizing that this is something they kind of got a little break on this whole way. That maybe.
Well, politically, it was easy to exclude to begin with, and it started with the public pensions. So when they found out that it wasn't right to just have public pensions not taxed, the answer was not to correct that problem, but to exclude a lot of private pension income. So we went to the wrong answer long ago, and so we built this house of cards that sooner or later is going to create a major mess. And my view is, let's address it today. Let's solve problems today so we can have a better future for all of us that's focused on job creation and our kids.
And other states, some other states do it.
Most other states
Yeah.
do it. We're only one of 4 states that have an income tax that don't subject that kind of income to the same kind of tax rate.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Looks like we're out of time.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Good to be
Thanks.
with you.